talked about Europe, how growth peaked in 2015 and started to slow over the last few years. We're forecasting a very slight slowdown for West Europe, nothing much. The reason being is the key growth countries like the UK and Spain. I mean, Spain, keep in mind, that was a country a couple of years ago. Spain's unemployment rate was 26%, and its youth unemployment rate was 62%. So if you came out of college in Spain in 2012, good luck finding a job. It started to pick up. That was the one country in Southern Europe that enacted some really sensible reforms. They made it easier to hire and fire people. They made it easier to attract investment and to start businesses, and it worked. Their economy grew by over 3% last year. So that's a positive side. It's going to start to slow now just because the potential for growth, particularly internally, is a little bit lower. But overall, a little bit more of the same for Europe. The weak euro will keep Europe from having a more major slowdown in the coming year. I won't talk too much. I put a couple slides in on each country, just Germany. Germany, key thing there's an election in September. Angela Merkel is the dominant political leader and economic leader right now in Europe, particularly with Britain pulling out of the EU and the French president having an approval rating of 4% right now. That's it's pretty low, 4%. I think you could find 5% of Democrats who might vote for Donald Trump before 4% of your total population doesn't support you, and that's it. It's incredible. So anyway, she controls the region right now. She's facing an election in September, and she might be in trouble. Her approval rating used to be, her party's approval rating used to be about 44% a year ago, which was double any other party in Germany. It's down to 33%. A lot of that has to do with the migration crisis over the last 2 years. 1.3 million people entered Germany in 2015 and 2016, just crossed the borders coming from the Middle East, from Africa, fleeing the war in Syria. A lot of people see that as causing instability within the country. There are a number of smaller scale terrorist attacks in Germany over the past 12 months or so. That's cost her a lot of support. And she's now facing a situation where she might not be able to form a new government after the next election. That's a big issue for Europe. If your dominant country, the country that's been driving you for recent years, suddenly is leaderless or in political gridlock. France remains relatively stuck in malaise right now, very low economic growth rates there. Britain, I mentioned, this was a country over the last 25 years drove more growth in West Europe than any other. We're looking at a slowdown now. Now, consumer spending in Britain has remained high so far, and that's kept the economy from falling. But business and investor confidence has shrunk dramatically. A lot of companies are now talking about pulling people out of Britain to go because they're going to leave the European Union. Places like Dublin and Frankfurt are looking for a big surge in investment in the financial sector and a lot of hires in the financial sector. So the British economy is headed for a pretty sharp slowdown in the coming years. Italy, I won't talk too much about Italy, but Italy is, its economic output is still it's still below where it was 15 years ago. Italy has been in that long of a slump. However, there was a little bit of positive news. We saw some investment in the manufacturing sector in the second half of last year because it's becoming cheap now to produce in Italy. As long as the euro stays down, Italy needs a very weak currency to succeed, and it hasn't had that in recent years, and that's one of the reasons why Italy has performed so poorly. I mentioned Spain. Spain growing just over 3% last year. I won't dwell on them again. So this is, like, as I mentioned, this is going to be the region with many of the most interesting elections in 2017. The French election bears watching. There's a far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, who's probably going to make the second round. The way it works in France is all the candidates run in the first round, and the top two face off in a few weeks in a second round election. So there's been times in the past where the top two finishers had 18% and 16% of the vote, and then they faced each other in runoff. This time, Marine Le Pen, the far-right candidate, she's polling at about 30% right now. So she's going to, by all means, make the second round. It depends who she faces as to how she does. If she faces somebody on the center-right, she'll be crushed because all of the voters on the left will support the center-right candidate. But if somehow, and it doesn't look likely at the moment, but if a left-leaning candidate makes it to the second round, well, there's a possibility she could win that election. East Europe, Russia has been in a recession as well for 2 years, driven by low oil prices, low commodity prices, as well as international sanctions put on by the United States, by Europe, by a number of other countries. Is Trump going to lift sanctions on Russia? He has said that if Russia shows that it's cooperating with us on certain issues, he'd like to lift sanctions. I don't know what that means, cooperating with us on certain issues. Which issues, he hasn't been clear. Maybe if Putin criticizes Meryl Streep, then he'll lift sanctions. I'm not sure. But if we lift sanctions, the Europeans will follow suit, because there's a lot of pressure in Europe to lift the sanctions. So if that would be a boon for the Russian economy. If you've been doing business in Russia, you know that it's been a very tough few years. So perhaps we'll see something change there. And I mentioned a lot of the political situation in the region. The one issue that remains totally unresolved is Eastern Ukraine. I think everybody's resigned themselves to the fact that Crimea is now part of Russia. But the Eastern Ukraine, parts of it remain controlled by pro-Russian militias. We don't know what's going to happen there. The government, if there was a stable government in Kiev, it would be one thing, but the government in Ukraine right now is so corrupt, just like all the previous ones, so they don't have much support internationally.